Hi, welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. I am so excited to have you all here with us today. We are here with Russell Case. And
Hey, we have I prepared an intro for today's show,
I want to
Harmony.
say your name first.
No, I've got it right here. It's Zeena Mohadeen.
No, it's Zeena Kalisperides.
We
Did I say
agreed
it right?
not to use that name.
Kalisperides.
Kalisperides.
That's really
Yeah.
pronounced well.
But you're not Greek.
No.
Who are you to say
Well
that she's
done.
not Greek? That's so racist. Fucking hell.
She told me she wasn't Greek.
Oh, she said that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Fair
Yeah,
enough.
that'll be my husband's surname.
All right.
That I've hijacked.
Yes.
Purely for
So,
yoga purposes.
And it means good evening, right?
It means good evening from the
You
from the
just
word
learned that.
Kalispera.
I know.
You
I
just
know.
learned that
I
30
know.
seconds ago.
I'm just updating our listeners on what I learned.
To update our listeners, Zeena Mohadeen is a New Zealand actress and singer.
Oh my gosh.
She is best known for her role as the title character in the television series Zeena Warrior Princess,
It's very true.
but also portrayed the news reporter Deanna Beers on the reimagined Battlestar Galactica series, which you introduced me to, Harmony.
Wasn't she also in our other favorite series, our Marvel series? She was in that.
She might have been in
she
Agents of
was
S.H.I.E.L.D.
In Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
She died, in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And
Not
also,
for real.
Zeena is also a UK-based licensed dentist and yoga teacher.
This is true.
Very, very nice to meet you. And
Nice to meet you both.
I really liked you in those shows.
Oh, thank you so much. The outfits were my favorite part.
Yeah. And you did
you
a
get
lovely
teased when you were a kid?
for being Greek.
No.
For being the warrior princess. So yeah, the first year at uni, that show was really big. So every time I introduced myself in Freshers Week, it was, as in the warrior princess. I was like, yeah, go with that.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing. That's kind of cool. It's like almost being called like a goddess.
Yeah, it stuck. I had sort of crowns bought for me and tiaras for birthday presents. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, appropriate.
Yeah, that was my dress up for birthdays.
Oh, good. That's so good. I love it.
I have to apologize. Harmony decided to give the dog a squeaky toy right during the bloody interview. It's not okay. That's not. She has other toys. She doesn't need to have the squeaky. We're recording.
Well, if we don't use the video, then we can just cut this out in the audio.
But she is super cute.
So you're a dentist.
Well, I'm a qualified dentist. I don't practice.
You're a qualified dentist.
Yeah. But you did practice
for about 10 years in the NHS.
Oh
yes.
my God.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, wow. Long days.
I would have to think that the worst part is the halitosis. Like the constant source of dismay is you'd think that. But you'd think.
Actually, I wasn't so put off by it. I was actually okay with it. When I trained at one of the hospitals. We wear masks. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was always a thing from before it was a thing.
Yeah.
But I trained at a hospital, across three hospitals in central London. And that is normally where general dental practitioners will send their worst patients to, because they either haven't got the resources to send them. So you train at the deep end straight, for 5 years. So by the time we got into general practice, halitosis was not a problem. But a little funny story around that was that I did have a patient once that came and he knew he was having an extraction that day. So he thought, well, I probably won't be able to eat much afterwards. So I'll make sure I eat before I come. And he said it to me. He said,
no.
I've just had my kebab. And I think it was literally just in the car before he came in. And when he opened his mouth, it was full of onion and parsley and bread and meat that I had to pick out.
Still
I think that was worse
there.
than any halitosis. As I have his kebab in there.
I'm always so self-conscious. I brush my teeth and I floss because I don't want them to catch anything that's been in there.
Exactly. You want to be able to. You don't think you're going to brush your teeth before you go to the dentist, but this guy was no.
Oh no, I'm going to be.
I don't have a stomach for that.
I'm going to be a bit hungry later, just for a bit of steak.
My parents always used to tease me because in Canada, a lot of our medical's covered, but dentists are not covered.
Yeah.
And dentists make a lot of money in Canada. And so they're always like, you should become a dentist. So they always used to tell me that from a very young age all the time. And I hated going to the dentist. Hated it with a passion.
That's always a sign not to become a dentist.
Yeah.
Whereas I loved it. I absolutely loved going to the dentist. I was so excited. I think because I had good teeth, so I didn't have any problems. So I didn't have any traumas associated with it. And I even asked my dentist to have braces, and he just looked at me and said, "You don't need them. Why do you want?" I said, "But they're cool, no?"
That's so funny. Wait, I gotta tell one more dentist story.
I have a dentist story. I'm just going to tell my dentist story.
I have an overbite.
Yeah.
So when I was younger, they were gonna fix it, and my parents, of course, didn't have any money to pay for the dentist and the retainer and all the braces and everything. And so they're like, well, just like try to make it less. So then I'd go into my like dental exams and they take the x-rays and I'd like literally move my teeth. So it doesn't, I'd fake it. So it doesn't look like an overbite.
Great.
Oh.
Great. Good for you. Well, as long as you're not in any pain.
No, it was fine.
No, exactly. There you go. I think there are too many mouths that all look the same now anyway, and that was one of the things that I was going through in dentistry. You'd often have patients turn up saying, with a picture of either Simon Cowell or from someone, someone who's from
Hollywood.
The Only Way is Essex.
The Only Way is Essex, yeah.
And they would say, I want to look like that. I want teeth like that.
I wanted to get vajazzled, like the people from Essex. Where you get your vagina bedazzled? Amazing. That was on the show. And
what show?
The Only Way is Essex. Great show.
Never seen it.
High quality.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
getting your vagina bedazzled was a thing because you want it to look good,
right?
Sparkly, attract attention because you're good. A lot of people are going to be seeing it.
Sounds like
because you're from Essex. Don't want to look like a slag.
So you just stick some jewels on there.
Yeah.
Some jewels.
Just a jewel. Just a one or two. Yeah. Get it. Go on.
Some glitter.
Glitter glab. I've often I've said to Harmony, speaking of bling, I've often said to Harmony that if for any reason I should fall, collapse, pass on the flag, as soon as possible, get the gold tooth.
You've got a gold
out
tooth?
Of my mouth. Get it out. The first thing that you do. Don't let anyone else have it. Don't let like a mortician or the government get their hands on it. Don't let anybody. Yeah, they will. You remember the Holocaust? They took the tooth. They took the teeth right away. And so, like I've said, get like Dr. Yui from Dune. Remember the tooth.
Yeah.
Remember the tooth.
Remember the tooth.
So I'm really proud of it. So I've been told on occasion that it's like a work of art. And I didn't realize that some fake teeth are better than others.
Well, it's all about how much you pay for it, surely.
Oh, I paid a lot for it. Yeah,
no,
I did.
Definitely gold is the gold standard in dentistry.
Really, still people
really
think that.
Apart from its lack of aesthetics, gold, is strong because you use an alloy, so it's a bit stronger than sort of pure gold,
right.
and it's strong in thin sections, so you don't have to destroy as much of the tooth. Whereas if you have veneers or crowns, you have to destroy quite a lot of the tooth to make space for that extra material. So
right.
But isn't it a crown in the first place? Isn't that what happened? Like they had to
it is a crown, yeah.
Because they left a post there for weeks.
Yeah.
And I just I would tongue it like, oh, it's just a post. That's nothing. There's nothing. It's like a fucking. And then they crowned it, but it's they said it was like really. Oh, this is like well done. This one.
Beautiful.
Like
well, but they might not be able to get it out then.
Oh. Well, what does Harmony? What would Harmony have to do to get it out? Is she just gonna?
You can call me. I'll come and get it out for you.
Okay.
You're gonna be in England, and like time is an issue. Like time,
we'll have to schedule a flight quickly.
Yes, we'll do it.
But no, seriously, she should get wrenched.
I can zoom her. I can guide her through it. Yeah, there we go.
So like, do like your like a
You can just make like a
FaceTime.
YouTube video.
Like a YouTube video.
Are we talking about like a screwdriver or a pliers situation?
Bit of both. A flat-headed screwdriver could do it.
Okay.
No one do this at home, please. This is not good advice for wobbling your tooth out.
Well, I mean, I'll be dead. I'll be dead. So it's like, how, what are you worried about?
You'll be fine.
You'll be
desecrating the body.
Okay.
I sort of imagine what I would really like to happen. I've talked to Harmony about this. Is that in the event of my untimely passing, I just would really like to have my body left in the woods.
Oh,
like in
eaten by bears or
vulture, whatever's out there, whatever, like they
and then
do
we'll
that.
Come and find your gold tooth there, and we'll know.
Well, they do that in some parts of India, don't they? Just like put a platform up and they put the body up there.
Do they? Gosh.
Yeah, we're in
Rishikesh.
In Rishikesh, they have platforms. They put the bodies up. I read about it. Yeah,
they burn the bodies.
Burn it.
But no, there's some sects that they put the bodies up on the platform.
I don't know about that.
It's true.
I don't know if that's true.
I just know they burn the bodies so quick. Like if anyone dies in our family, we have to get on a flight ASAP to go back to Mauritius to even be able to attend the funeral.
In Mauritius,
but I think babies in Varanasi anyway. The babies, they don't burn.
Oh, they leave that to be
put
eaten
into the river, into the Ganges.
Well, that's going to get eaten.
No. Well,
that's going to get eaten for sure. Yeah. Well, I think that'd be all right. If you would wrap me and put me in the elbow.
And
the river.
Cows as well.
Yeah, you find those in the river. Now, Mauritius, is that like an island?
It is. It's just off of the east coast of Madagascar, so east of Africa.
Oh.
Much closer to Africa than India. But
it's an Indian island.
Well, it was colonized by first colonized by the French, and then the British.
Okay.
But was first discovered by, I think, either the Portuguese or the Dutch. And it's where the dodo originates from.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh,
I didn't realize that.
Bird.
Yeah.
And so by discovered, you mean like destroyed the local population with disease and guns?
Of dodos, yes. Dodos.
Oh, there were only dodos there. There were no people.
There were no people. So everyone that was brought over was either through sort of, I think they call it indentured labor rather than slave
indentured labor.
Yeah. But it's still a form of,
slavery.
Slavery.
Yeah. Yeah, we learned about that in school in the States as well. A lot of people came over as indentured servitude.
Yeah.
You do your 7 years, which is prison sentence, right? And then you're free. And you change your name to like Freeman,
yes.
Yeah. It's like
or
Richard.
Brown or
Brown, yeah.
Well, that sort of happened in Mauritius. Not so much that the names were changed. My cousins and I always argue around how, we weren't really slaved in those Indian populations in Mauritius, because we were allowed to keep our names. I think that's a really important thing, the important difference between the two groups, that we don't have that trauma of losing that level of connection to our ancestry. We were allowed to keep our names. But when you would go and register your child's name, if they couldn't spell it, they would spell it how they would want to spell it. So,
right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like Rangaswamy would become Rangasamy. Or
Yeah.
So it's just however it felt, sounded good in either the French or the English tongue.
Right. Oh, interesting.
So that's how the variation started to come, and the watering down of our connection to India started.
Right.
I was surprised to hear that your father. You mentioned this. It really struck me because growing up in Louisiana and in New Orleans, that you said that your father spoke Creole. I speak grandfather.
Creole. Yeah, I speak Creole.
You speak Creole.
Yeah. That's the mother tongue of Mauritius.
But I don't understand how that can be a mother tongue because it's to me
French,
that's an amalgamation of different languages that are occurring locally in New Orleans.
So the base of it is French, and then what's layered on top of that are the different languages, as you say, from all the different regions of the world that the people in Mauritius have come from. So you've got Chinese, you've got Tamil, Indian with all its variations in there of Tamil, Urdu, Hindi, Telugu.
Your pronunciation of Urdu is amazing. It was exquisite.
bless you, of Telugu, some Marathi in there as well. And then, so depending on what your background is from, your Creole will have different words within it, but the basis of it is French. So, yeah.
So it's French with just a little bit extra.
Yeah.
We'd call that lagniappe in Louisiana.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit extra. That's what lagniappe. Yeah, so it's French with a little bit extra in it. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And we just met some friends from Guadeloupe. I mean, some friends from Hamish is from Guadeloupe. And yeah, it's so interesting to have a similar language as well over there in that part of the world as well.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
But I'd have to think that if you spoke Creole in some parts of, some parishes of Louisiana, that you wouldn't be understood properly.
Probably not. No.
Yeah.
But interestingly, my mum's sister lives in northern France. And she said, my mum and her sister said in the 70s when they were just sitting on a bench on a beach, and they were speaking Creole. And there's this, old French guy sitting on the bench with them. And he turned around and said to them, where did you learn this dialect from? And they said, well, we're from Mauritius. And he said, well, this is an old dialect from northern France.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Interesting.
Language just carries across so many connections. Had he not understood them, he may not have, and then they had a lovely little chat about that. So they had something in common that you would think three people probably wouldn't have had any in common between them. Just brought them together.
That's beaucoup cool.
Beaucoup cool?
Yeah, that's what we'd say in Slidell. That's, beaucoup. That's very
cool. Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
It's beaucoup cool.
Which was cool.
Yeah. Just a little lagniappe for our listeners at home. Yeah. Wow.
So I speak Creole. My grandfather, my mum's side, was actually, his parents are directly from India. So when they landed in Mauritius, I think my grandfather was born a couple of years later, they were still speaking Tamil at home.
Oh, wow.
And taught him Sanskrit and Tamil. But obviously
like Iyengar Brahmins speaking Tamil.
I don't know about Iyengar, but and not Brahmins. But we have this joke that everyone left India probably on a boat as the lowest caste and arrived in Mauritius as high castes, right? We're all like, literally all of us are like, we're the highest caste. No, we're the highest caste.
Yeah. Like Anna Sorokin. Yeah, landed on the boat, high class.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, completely. Right. And we're all Brahmins.
Self-made.
Yeah.
You said this thing about your grandfather that was really interesting. That let's see, what did it say here? That he hadn't yet suffered from the colonial brainwashing, but the implication was that it did come.
Yeah.
What is that? What did you mean by that?
So for him, he was really connected to his roots and his stories. The mate has gone.
No, just this.
He was really connected to the old stories.
Yeah, so the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita.
Right.
It was like they had conference every Sunday. The family would sit. There was no TV. They would sit and they would chat and they'd explore and they discuss,
tell stories.
Exactly. And he would try and do that for my mom and her siblings. And as I was growing up, and as she would recount the stories, her and her sisters found it hilarious. They thought this was just all fake, and because they were growing up in French-led Mauritius, so schools, the only language you spoke in school was French or English, and you didn't speak your sort of home tongue or your mother tongue.
Right.
And it was just an embarrassment. So by that generation already, they'd started wearing European clothes. They weren't really associated, apart from at weddings or ceremonies, but the daily rituals had started to disappear.
Yeah.
And the connection to all these stories just seemed like myths and, they're not important. The same stuff we see in, I think, in generations now.
It's an immigrant dynamic.
Completely. Yeah, exactly. Amongst any immigrant, I think,
Right.
Yeah. And you guys, on that side of the world, definitely.
It's why I don't speak Swedish or Hebrew or Yiddish.
Yeah.
I speak a little Yiddish.
Would you want to learn? Would you want to go back and learn that?
No, I'm too schmucky to want to learn any more Meshuggah Yiddish. It's like, it's a crazy town. But, Mushbuka is something that's really very important to me.
You picked up a lot then. I think that's what we see here now, that so many children, kids, there's a whole generation. I think my cousins who are 10 years older than me, when they were born here, my aunts didn't teach them Creole. Let alone Tamil. We didn't speak Tamil, but Creole wasn't even taught in the house, so they didn't even speak Creole. But I was so determined, I wanted to learn. So I had to ask my parents. I think I was around 5. I said, "Can you teach me?" Because those two next door, like my neighbors around me, are all speaking their mother tongue or their family's heritage, lineage, language at home. They were like, "Okay, we'll teach you."
That's interesting. So there's something really interesting there about you as a person, because you were also this kind of kid that woke up like Saint Alia or Leto II. You said, presently at 2 years old, I will be a doctor. I will be a dentist. Right?
Yeah, it was. I think I remember I had playing with like I had a doctor's kit as kids do. And it wasn't like, oh, I want to be a doctor this week, and next week I want to be a hairdresser, and the week after I want to be a nurse or a fire engine driver or whatever. It was I want to be a doctor, and I still feel that when I say that, like it was here.
It's because you're a good girl.
Oh,
you're a good girl that wanted to do good. So you wanted to learn Creole. You wanted to be a physician. Like your parents were physicians.
My parents were like, we don't even have to bribe her to do this stuff.
We
haven't had to pay her.
One. Yeah. Do you have siblings that hate you for that?
No, so they stopped there. They were like, that's it. We've lucked out with this one. Let's just stay here.
Right. Oh, you're an only child.
Yeah.
And you're a good girl. You're the good daughter.
Why do you think that is? Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I think I had my bout of rebellion, my parents would say. Yeah, I didn't.
You became a dentist, for example.
Well, I didn't go into I don't know. In my friend who studied in the States, you have to do like pre-med college or your course pre-med, and over here we don't have to do that. We can go straight into medicine or dentistry from A levels from school. But I flopped in my A levels big time.
No!
Yeah.
You were at the pub.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
She was at the club dancing.
I was at the clubs. Yeah, we were just anything but studying. So flopped. So I did not get in. So I went to study. But fortuitously, I went to study biochemistry, which I loved.
You did?
And loved it. I found it so much more intriguing than dentistry. It had because you're learning about the body at a cellular level. It almost felt mystical. How the nervous system works, how the vagus system, the vagus nerve. That was so impressive from early on, that this one nerve traveled around the body. I remember thinking, well, what does it do then?
Yeah.
Why is it there?
It's just sending messages and receiving messages. That's what it's doing all day.
Yeah.
Opening and closing.
Why is it connected to the heart, the gut, the brain, the face, the jaw? The diaphragm.
It's incredible.
The mula
bandha. Yeah. Why is it all there?
Yeah.
You mentioned in your bio to us that you'd had an interesting number of kind of revelatory mystic experiences, kundalini openings, and yet you had the kind of awareness of mind to sort of see what was happening to you through the lens of a biochemist or a physician. And I wonder if you could talk about those experiences.
Well, I think the first one probably was when I started practicing yoga. My mum practiced yoga from when she was about 15 in Mauritian. She was practicing Shivananda yoga.
Oh, wow.
So when she came to England, there weren't many classes, and she was training to be a nurse. So I don't think she had the time or the money, or the access to classes. So she just did what she could at home. And as I was growing up, I remember seeing her in like shoulder stand and plow. And at 5 and 6, you can do that, right? It's just so easy. It's playful. So I was doing all of that from a really young age. And then around 15, I got introduced to Ashtanga. It wasn't called Ashtanga, but it was basically the postures of sun salutation, A, B, standing sequence. In school, we had a Wednesday afternoon class that was like personal studies, and every term it changed. And one term it was It was Ashtanga. Well, it was yoga, but the teacher happened to be teaching Ashtanga.
Was that
power yoga or something?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Was that Vicky Scarlett, or was
No,
that came later?
She came a little bit later. But this
Okay.
is a school teacher, Mrs. Lee, and
Well,
we
that's
were there
amazing.
in our kilts practicing.
Wow.
In our school uniform.
I think you mean you actually there's skirts, but you called them
kilts. Well, we wore kilts to school.
They're real kilts.
Yeah.
She was in North England,
but that's a skirt.
right?
No, North London.
North
but
London.
It's like a dress. Like
like
kilts.
So I'm
Scottish
confused.
kilt. A Scottish
but
kilt.
like I thought only men wore those.
No.
Yeah, but in schools in England, a lot of the uniforms we had kilts.
But those are skirts.
Yeah, but without a sporran.
But they look like
they look like.
But they look like dresses.
No,
they're skirts.
You see, this is the gap in the British knowledge that, again, like some things just completely escape me. And I think maybe my ex-wife never wore a kilt. I don't know.
Oh my God.
I would never have worn one either if I had the choice.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Trust me, we would walk out to school and roll our skirts up, because they were so long. But we were doing yoga at that, in that class. And then, so I'd had moments of like I remember in that class realizing this is home. Like this feels so comfortable, so normal, so like I should have been doing this all my life.
Oh, wow. And
then I think it was about 4 years later when I met Vicky and started practicing with her. I was about 19. I was about to start just started university, and I'd practiced with her.
Uni.
Just on a Sunday, actually, when I came home at weekends, because her class was where my parents lived, and I was in Guildford at the time. And then it was about 2 years in that I was in Mauritian, I remember, and I just had this like energy rise through me. Like I could have got up and started dancing, like I was in a club. And then all of a sudden my head, and I was there going, but this is happening just from sitting here and breathing.
Right.
This is not induced by any illegal substances or
anything.
Like, how is this happening? So I think it happened really fortuitously at the same time. There was a real serendipitous sort of quality to me studying biochemistry and that happening at the same time, that there was those two pieces of knowledge were coming together, and I was being told they're not separate, right? This is not, these two things are not separate. They are one of the same, and they're complementary to each other.
I was thinking about your grandfather and these mystic experiences, and I was thinking about like Sri Aurobindo, in prison for bombing a British consulate, and then suddenly having this mystic experience, and the Vedas coming to him, or Gandhi having a mystic experience and giving up his law degree to embrace his spiritual life, and then going and studying the sutras for the first time. But it sounded like the kind of the opposite was happening with your grandfather. He was like becoming more and more colonized.
I don't think he was. I think he saw his children experiencing that. My grandfather stayed very true and very close to his roots. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. He did. And he was really strong about imparting the stories and the knowledge and the wisdom of the Vedas to his children. And now, my mum and her sisters will remember, and they want to search back because they realize there's so many gaps in their knowledge, from not wanting to embrace it, for wanting to be part of or be accepted, within culture, be accepted within culture, within school, within jobs, to survive, essentially.
It's really interesting, like how there's been a kind of a movement, much more so in our time in history, where people are really recognizing that history is important.
Very.
And roots are important. And I think more so than at any other time in history, where it was really about trying to like fit in, and the future is important, right? Rather than the past.
Yeah, an element of conformity, of acceptance, of not wanting to be seen as different, not wanting to be seen as other than, and because you're not safe then, are you? When you're outside of the tribe, you're not safe. You can end up in the woods with the bears, right?
Or
the vultures.
Or in our country, tied to the front of a pickup truck.
Yeah, in America.
In America, excuse me, not in Canada. Not in Canada, that doesn't happen.
No.
But, in the States, you're constantly being dragged behind a pickup truck.
Or hung from trees. That's always a problem too there.
Yeah. It's too many trees is the problem. That's what I think. Yeah.
Get rid of all the oxygen.
Yeah, if you get rid of the trees. Yeah.
But yeah,
and the inbreeding, if we could stop inbreeding in its tracks, then we could stop all the problems in America. Interesting. So it's so often also interesting, like when the grandchildren start picking up what when the grandparents are doing, and then that's happening to you, and you're having these spontaneous mystical experiences doing yoga, and then you, like Gandhi, gave up your sanctioned
Career.
path for yogurt.
For yogurt. In many ways.
For an uncertain future.
Well, that's what you said, right? You were one of those weird dentists that would prescribe probiotics.
Oh, that's such a great link. Yeah, I didn't get that. So true. But growing up, my parents, they worked, as I said, as nurses for 40 years, and they worked, around doctors for so long, and they would pick up things that the doctors would tell their patients. And I think in the 60s and 70s, medicine was very different. It was much more holistic than it is now. And that sort of application of witchery, witchcraft was still okay. Whereas by the time I got to, working as a dentist, advising patients to take probiotics, or we had a drink, like a probiotic drink in the UK, a couple of them at the time that were out on the market, very novel, and I was like, well, take that before you take your antibiotics.
I'm like, what?
And my colleagues are like, you can't say this. You can't say this stuff. This is madness. This is just
but the antibiotics are destroying their gut biome.
Heaven forbid that they would be ever known to be doing that. And I think that because we don't have to do an undergrad before you get into dentistry. A lot of people go in straight from 18. They're green. They're really fresh. They just go in from biology A level and chemistry A levels to straight to dentistry without much life experience, in between. And so, of course, they become dentists in the same vein without much life experience. And the system through which you're taught is a pharmaceutical model. So you just adhere to that, and anything else outside of that is just nonsense. And fast forward 20 years, probiotics and prebiotics, you can't
get away from them these days.
There are too many, the shelves in all the shops are just filled to the brim with them. So and we're all taking them.
Again, it's like kind of come full circle, right? Like of this time, I think in like the 60s and 70s, where people were like more interested in like natural health, and the natural health movement really started, but then there was sort of maybe the 80s.
There was a resistance to it.
There was like a dark period.
Yeah. And maybe that does happen every couple of generations. Russell, you point out that connection between grandchild and grandparent. I think if you have that relationship, you see that with your parents, you're very resistant to what they're telling you. When grandma or grandpa tells you to do something, it's, oh, that's interesting, or that's sweet, or there's a slightly different delivery maybe there.
In the same way that our grandparents were sort of anti-fascist and we're Antifa, like we're also sort of Antifa in our family, whereas our parents...
It's all right. But I think, to some extent, if I hear my dad speaking sometimes, you'd be like, you should have joined the National Front at some point.
It's an age thing.
That generation, they're like, well, if you came here to work, then that's okay. But if you didn't, then you shouldn't be here.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it comes from from a place of like, we worked hard, we contributed, and so everyone else should do the same. And it's like, well, actually, not everyone had the same opportunities, even though you created those opportunities for yourself. You were
it's
supported.
Not fair.
It's not always fair.
It's not a fair system, right?
It's not a fair system. So even though it was hard for them to come to the UK and leave their families and maybe take loans to even to get an air ticket to come to them,
right?
That was still available. And it wasn't out of forced, like a refugee status or having to leave somewhere.
Yeah. I have an example of that there's a lot of talk now about in the United States of the progressives wanting to forgive student loans. And I was like, yeah, that's a good thing to do. It is an oppressive system. It creates an enormous
debt economy,
indentured servitude.
Yeah.
And where you can't make the same choices that a free, loving 60s hippies can make because they don't have a lot of student debt.
Yeah.
Because education was free in the 60s, and relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And so I had 100,000 in student loan.
Wow.
That I was quite lucky. I met a very wealthy woman who helped me get out of that debt by giving me an
employment,
highly overpaid yoga job.
That's great.
Right. And then I said, well, I paid off that debt. I worked for it. Like, I was really fucking privileged.
But you still turned up
really
to that job,
fucking
right? You
I
still
turned up to the job. Yeah.
You still turned up, and you still did what you need to do. I think it's important. From the way I look at it is that we shouldn't penalize ourselves if we've been privileged. We shouldn't look at it as something that we should
feel bad about.
Yeah, but we should honor that it's a position of responsibility.
Acknowledge
that to have privilege is to be in a position of responsibility. How do we pass that on? How do we share that? That doesn't necessarily mean money. It can be don't give the man a fish, give him a fishing rod. Let the person feel supported within themselves. They have the skills to pass that on as well.
I love that.
So.
Were you born in London, or did you? Yeah,
I was born in London. Yeah.
So your parents moved to London, and then you were born.
Yeah. So they met at nursing college.
Nice.
And
are they both from Mauritius?
They're both from Mauritius, but my dad's Muslim and mum's Hindu. So when they got married, they were completely disowned by their family.
I don't understand how that can work.
That's incredible. That's amazing.
But like when they met, surely they exchanged last names.
And or everyone else around them told me, do you know he's Muslim? You don't know she's Hindu.
Wow.
I'm sure I could just hear that.
What was that like?
He's Muslim.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
They don't talk much. They're very private people, my parents, actually, and I have to really ask them stuff. But when I do ask them, they do share. Yeah, sorry, Russell.
No, I'm being a lout, and I was just saying my stepmother doesn't speak English, and it really helps their marriage. It's like they don't speak. That's what I thought you meant. They don't speak much to each other, and that can really help.
No, my mum speaks way too much, my dad would say.
But they don't speak much.
Well, they don't speak much about their trials and tribulations and the passages of struggle that they may have gone through. But if I ask them, then they ease it out. It gets eased out of them. But they tend not to want to focus on that. But so when I have asked them about it, it was hard. Of course, it was hard. They were, their families didn't really want to know. They didn't want to know when they were getting married. They just had their two friends as their witnesses at their wedding.
Wow.
No family support whatsoever.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah,
that was
on both sides. Both sides of their families were like, "You're crazy.
You're a disgrace. You're a disgrace to the family. But love ruled.
But they must have come back. Because you have such a nice relationship with your grandparents.
Yeah, it was actually my mum's brother-in-law, her sister's husband. So the same sister who lives in France. Her husband had found out my mum was pregnant with me because one of my mum's friends is still close with one of her sisters, and he travelled over from France and stayed with my mum's sister in London and said, he used to work on the ship, so everyone knew he was used to just travelling whenever he wanted to.
Right.
And he said, I've just come to see you for 5 days. And he would just say, I'm going to see this friend today, and I'm going to go and see that friend today. And in fact, what he did was find out where my dad lived. And he sat at the bus station in the sort of the local bus depot, central bus depot, for 3 days, thinking, well, I'm going to bump into her. Like, she's going to have to go do something, and she's going to have to come through here. That was the faith. That was the faith that he had, that he would bump into her. And then he did bump into her, and he said, well, we've heard you're pregnant, so it is what it is, but you're not going to be on your own. We're not leaving you on your own. So
wow.
That's beautiful.
So for me,
oh my gosh, that's so amazing.
Beautiful gift that I've always had in my life.
You brought your grandparents and your parents back together.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So my mum's side of the family, I think there was only sort of one member that still, for a very long time, didn't accept my dad, but the rest of both sides were just so loving. So I never witnessed much of that, apart from one uncle, but that sort of disownment and intolerance, you know.
Yeah.
How do you think that that's like affected you and your sort of views of the world and religion and religious experience? Do you think it's...
I think I grew up very tolerant. You know, I'd like to say very tolerant, you know, and tolerant in the sense of I saw that despite so many differences, my parents worked so hard to focus on the similarities. And rather than see the differences, they saw every part of their life that overlapped and was similar, and that they could draw from to share their experiences from, and to share that, to show me that through shared experiences we grow closer to each other, and that actually the more you look at different people, the more similarities you see. As I was mentioning before, Mauritius has, you know, such a mixed culture. We've got, you know, Chinese Mauritian, Creole Mauritian, sort of African Mauritians, and then Indians, mixed, whether that, you know, a mixture of all of that, and we all say we're Mauritian, and so we, you know, we all speak the same language, and there's that commonality, whether that's rum or dance, you know, the national dance, or a biryani, and the beautiful thing is that whenever there's a sort of a religious ceremony, a festival, whether it's Christmas or Diwali or Eid, or Chinese New Year, it's a bank holiday for every single one of those religions.
Right.
Yeah, beautiful. That's so nice.
I think I'm very lucky to have been brought up amongst that. And then also, you know, having had aunts and uncles from different backgrounds, different nationalities as well. Yeah, just always felt very wholesome in that sense. But it's not always the case. You know, there's lots of animosity amongst certain people in Mauritius as well, which, you know, certain groups, which you just have to accept and hope that, you know, everyone works through it. Yeah.
I think in Great Britain that I'm just going to blurt this out. I think, and I think in Great Britain you would be considered Black,
Asian, Indian.
You're considered Asian or Indian.
Yeah.
Because I've heard I'm mistaken then, because I thought that people of color were often grouped as Black people in Great Britain. I'd heard that.
Definitely different. Like if you're going to tick one of those lovely forms and tick your ethnicity, it's probably Indian other or some British Indian other.
That's okay.
You know,
I think maybe when I was there 20 years ago, I remember seeing an Indian or can I say subcontinent?
Yeah.
A subcontinental on TV, and he was a member of a Black coalition. And they said, "Yeah, we're Black," and I was like, "Oh, that's different to me." And I think maybe they made more of a maybe they make more of a distinction now.
Maybe you know, there wasn't so much talk. I don't know how long ago, you know, 10, 15 years ago. I don't think the discussion of race had the same platform. People were obviously trying. It's always been there. It's always been a focus for us living it, you know, on a day-to-day basis. But it definitely hasn't been as prominent as it has been in the last 2 years. You know, the last 2 years, I think we've seen such a shift in the way we address race, and address it with a lot more importance, I think. And racism, not racism. Let's, you know, just say what it is.
Progressively?
You know. Progressively.
It's getting, really?
Yeah, I don't know if I think it's just people are having more conversations. People who would say, well, I'm not racist, but... you know, starting to question the but. You know, starting to say,
the but part.
What is the but about? What am I really saying here with the but?
Yeah.
You know, or people who, you know, I have again a wonderful extended God family, and you know, and we were having discussions about how I'm perceived. You know, they're like, but we just see you as you, and I'm like, yeah, but if you don't want to hear what I go through, then you don't really know, you know, who I am. And it's like, but we don't see you as anything else other than just our family. And I get that, but you know, but you know, there are things that I experience or I have experienced that, you know, for you to be aware of it means that you will stand up for it, perhaps, because you're so caring about about me, you wouldn't want to see me go through that. So when you see that happening to someone else, you'd be more aware that that's actually racism that's happening. And I think that's really starting to land, that concept of actually that's not acceptable. That sort of language or that differentiation is not acceptable anymore.
Would you say with your husband, because he's Greek, and looks very white?
Yeah.
So you must have experienced a lot of, I mean, maybe not a lot, but some instances of things going on, right?
Yes, but I mean, even as I said to you earlier, we live in West London, which has quite a high Indian population. And so whenever we'd be walking around in Ealing, for example, and the old Massies are there, and they'd be looking at us and still us to say, I've just had another look.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But equally in Cyprus, when we go to see his parents, I remember recently we were on a British Airways flight and it landed like 1 a.m, and all the English people were just ushered in and through, didn't even look at their passports, and they stopped me straight away to look at my passport.
Yeah.
Right.
I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Carry on, off you go. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And
it's subtle things sometimes, isn't it?
It is. And he said, had I not been married to you, I would not have noticed this stuff. And it's not because people are racist. It's just because it's not in their field of vision.
Yeah. It's not in their immediate experience.
Yeah,
it's not happening to somebody that they love or to themselves. So
I think the more
blind spot.
Yeah, the more we mix, the more we amalgamate together and mesh together, the more we see that. And we don't want to see that when it's happening to people we care about, like you say, and people we love.
Yeah.
So then we'll stand up and maybe say, actually, no, that's not right. We won't tolerate that.
Yeah.
It's interesting you use the word amalgamate, because that reminds me of how we had the word melting. Fillings, fillings. I was thinking of the word the melting pot, and there is always this talk in school, the United States is a melting pot, which is to say that all of the ethnicities that come to the United States will become fused into one like little fascist structure. Like a bounded twigs, and but actually I think like the word jambalaya is much more appropriate. Like we're in a mixture together, and we have these very unique differences, and these values are going to remain different.
Or a kitchery.
Kitchery.
Yeah.
But I like the jambalaya has a lot of ingredients, right? So more than
kitchery. And so, like, because it's so very difficult to talk about very important values that you hold different. For example, that, I want to take on credit to buy a car and Harmony doesn't. You have deeply rooted, deep set value differences that are going to mean that we're in conflict.
But I mean, that happens across cultures, right? That's not just within same cultures. I think that's an ethic and moral thing that you kind of maybe need to discuss before we get married. What's your
or go on air?
What's your stance on taking up finance? But I always say, like, when I look at my parents, as much as they have their, they've tried to focus on the similarities, there are certain things that they really focus on. My mum's like, when I die, I want to be cremated. My dad's like, when I die, I want to be buried. That's the Islamic way, and that's the Hindu way.
Right.
And they're both very on par with the fact they're going to honor each other's wishes to
But that's nice.
Of course,
and that is the way it works.
And they don't demand of the other that they do it like the way that they do it.
No, and also they didn't have the ceremony, probably financially as well. They didn't have each other's ceremonies, so one didn't have to do the other.
Right, they just had a legal ceremony.
Yeah, which was beautiful. But when my husband and I got married, I had a Greek ceremony. We had a Greek ceremony and we had a Hindu ceremony. So we did both.
Nice.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I know lots of people who do that too, when they come from different cultures with different like wedding ceremonies, instead of trying to just combine them into one, then they just have two.
And we just had 7 days of my big fat Greek wedding and my big fat Hindu wedding,
which is pretty much like the same
wedding,
kind of like.
Exactly, And the two families were all saying, "Oh, they're just the same as us. They're just doing the same thing. Instead of walking around the fire, they're walking around a table, and instead of being tied at the waist, they're tied at the head."
it's beautiful actually to see that.
Yeah.
Like in mirror.
Yeah. So again, two cultures that would have thought they're not similar at all are so brought together as seeing each other so similarly.
Yeah.
We did some kind of Scottish rite, didn't we? Which was surprising
like
to
Scottish
me.
Wiccan.
Cool.
I don't know.
We did
made
some
up
kind of tying of a cloth. Yeah, I was like, wow, this is really like a kind of Scotland.
I think Jewish ceremonies have
You wanted to break a bottle, didn't you? You did a glass. You wanted to do that.
I'm sure something got broken.
Yeah, you were not intact, as I remember. We have an important question that you wanted to bring up, and actually, I was surprised as I was writing down the questions. Like thoughts about cultural appropriation were coming up, and then I read down to the bottom of your bio that you also wanted to talk about appropriation. Yeah. Harmony does not. She doesn't like it. But you and I both really wanted to get into this, and I thought I have a kind of.
I didn't say that because I don't read the.
Many times you've said to me, like, I don't want to talk about it. It's like
I say it in general.
Yeah. It is a tricky subject. It is tricky to navigate. I think it's because we don't know. We don't have the language. Perhaps we don't understand. We don't. And I think again, it comes down to sitting down around a fire and listening to people, and understanding what triggers people, what doesn't. What may trigger someone may not trigger somebody else, and I think that's where the sort of the difficulty in understanding that minefield lies. So language is really important.
I like the idea of listening and having conversation. I feel like this labeling of things all the time is really
not healthy,
not helpful.
No, I agree,
because it's like a stereotype, which is kind of a shortcut. It's like a shortcut to your brain.
That's all language.
Into saying like, oh, this is that thing, that's that. And it's like...
That's every single word
and so
is that.
I know, but that's always my problem with like the, cultural appropriation. It's like throughout history, from the beginning of time, every culture has appropriated every other culture to a certain extent. So how far back are we going to go?
I think there's a limit to, where we... talk between appropriation and appreciation. I think that's the sort of the boundary that we sort of start to filter through.
Exactly.
And it's where people have suffered, and I think if we're going to be a civilized group of people, if we're claiming to be so evolved, then it's okay. Surely we have the capacity then to start exploring these wider contexts and wider cultural sort of conversations. And for me, I think wherever there's been harm, we're rooting it back down to ahimsa, right? We're rooting it right back down to the first principles of yoga. What we do, if we're causing harm, we should not do. Simple.
Yeah.
And if we can learn that, and we can have conversations about what causes harm, which is appropriation, i.e., I think making money off of something that you've taken from someone else and not sort of recognize that that's where the source is from, or paid some context back, whether that's financial or just driving business back to them. I think that's wrong. I think if you're appreciating it, and then even if it's just a case of referencing your source and saying, I've learned from these people, this is the lineage I'm from, that I've learned from, and this is what I'm adding to it, but I recognize that it comes from this lineage or from this source, then it becomes more of an appreciation and an evolution. We all know yoga's never been the same from when it was first created. There's so many iterations of it, so many sects and different ways of practicing. But the ones that don't stay true to the roots of it, I think, in terms of what is it we're trying to explore? What is it we're trying to, stay connected to? That's when I think it starts to become appropriated rather than appreciated.
But that's what was really interesting to me was you talked about in your bio this story about walking into Eileen Hall's yoga studio in Australia, in Sydney, and you said that you had been transported to India, and so it was interesting, and you said that it meant a lot to you that Eileen was using Sanskrit terms to teach the yoga and knew the Yoga Sutras and knew the terms in Sanskrit and not using the English term for upward facing dog or something like that, Adho Mukha Svanasana or something like that.
Svanasana.
And so it's fascinating to me because you're not in India, you're in Sydney.
Mm.
And she's not Indian, she's Australian. And so by definition, it is a construction. It's a fabricated situation where you feel feel that you've been transported, which is to say that you feel that there's something authentic about it.
Yeah.
And so it's so ineffable. And I wanted to hear your more of your feelings about it, because there was a point there, as you said, where it stopped being appropriation and it started being authentic and appreciation, as you said, which I thought was really lovely.
I think it boils down to someone's intention, and not just intention, and how much they've devoted themselves. You guys probably know Eileen, and how much time someone studies at the source and devotes themselves. And she loves India. Like, she loves and lives and breathes the teachings of Mother India. And that to her is what she wants to share. And so it doesn't come from a place of, I'm doing this because it's cool. I'm doing it because it's fashionable. I'm doing it because it's going to get me Instagram likes. It's far from it. She's not done the archetypical pictures outside of a temple, covered in ash, just to get the likes. She's there living, breathing it, and saying, I remember when some beginners came into the room, and she started just talking to them with the Sanskrit terminology. So today we're going to start you on Surya Namaskara A and B, and we're going to be looking at your bandhas and your dristis.
Oh my God! As a beginner, I'd be like,
and just talking about, and we base this on the yamas and the niyamas. Just throwing all this stuff at them. And afterwards, we were going for tea afterwards, and I said, Eileen, I found that interesting because at the time, this was 2016, I remember I was going into studios, and it was just, there was no Sanskrit. Like, it was just only Ashtanga, like literally only Ashtanga classes. It felt like we're using any Sanskrit.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe the odd chanting. And it felt very sort of sugar, not coated, but just, the classes were being sugar coated with Sanskrit, but not for any real purpose or reason.
Namaste.
Or intention. Yeah. Namaste.
Yeah.
Always. And I remember the odd loka samasta sukhino bhavantu at the end, let us all be in peace, and off we go.
Yeah.
Shanti, shanti.
There was actually studios, I don't know if it was the same in England, but in Canada there was actually studios that said no Sanskrit.
Yeah, we had a few.
Yeah.
And they thought that was really cool. So Eileen, I said to her, I was intrigued. I thought, this woman's got some balls, right, to be doing this, right, to be going so against the grain. And she said, Zeena, if they are scared by a little bit of a foreign language, then they are not ready for yoga. And that has always resonated with me so much, that I still feel we have to, as a teacher, I choose to walk a fine line. I kind of think, am I going to do more harm than good by speaking to them with this language that might put them off yoga? Probably.
You can translate.
But what I do is I use both words, and I say I'm going to use the English and I'm going to use the Sanskrit, and I use both. And I say, okay, and if I see someone struggling with it, then I'll move more towards, okay, let's stay with the English for now, and then we'll move on. The doorway to the Sanskrit is always still open, but we can always modify it to make it accessible. But I think to take it away completely, I think that's where we start losing the essence. We have a friend who, I think he's a bass player, and he's from Greece, but he lives in New York now. But he studied all around India for about 6 years, learning traditional classical Indian music and all the traditional classical instruments. And the way he spoke about Sanskrit as a musical instrument,
beautiful,
and how it marries up with the science of the vibrations throughout the different parts of the body and the brain. Yeah, it just feels like, again, such a disservice to allow that language to go. And you feel it when you're in a lead county class, and you hear Ekonavimshatahi, inhale, vimshatahi, exhale. There's that rhythm that takes you through your practice. It is so much more than just words, right?
Yeah.
It's an energy, it's a vibration, and it's something that just lifts you.
Yeah.
And carries you and supports you.
Yeah. That was actually maybe one of the it was one of my very early experiences in a traditional Ashtanga yoga class. and Lucy Madarella was teaching, and she taught the whole class full vinyasa, primary series, and she used only Sanskrit. So even inhale, exhale, purvaka, hre, chaka,
wow,
all the Sanskrit numbers, all the postures in Sanskrit, that's it. And it was like a magical incantation. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. And I think that really pulled me into it, because I was like, this is magic. Like, she's casting a spell on the class. Like, it felt like that.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
It's a form
and
of
I've
mantra.
never had anyone else teach a class like that in all of my experience of yoga.
All your
but
years
it was
in Mysore?
beautiful. They speak in English. Even the counting, 1, 2, 3. She only did Sanskrit the whole time. It was so beautiful.
And it is so powerful, you know, when you chant mantra, when you I remember actually going back to my Vicky, the teacher that I was starting to learn Ashtanga with.
Vicky Scarlett.
Vicky Scarlett. You know, I remember being in maybe Utthita Hasta, and you know, I was struggling with my balance, and out of nowhere, Om Namah Shivaya just came to me. Like, I wasn't used to mantra being associated with asana, and Om Namah Shivaya just came, and it started to really stabilize me, or I became more stable, and that's when that relationship again started to intertwine, that the mantra overlays with the asana, that the asana overlays with mantra and breath, and it all works together, and you can't divorce them from each other, you know, and still, I think, and still call it yoga.
I have 2 interesting thoughts about that. I mean, the first was Om Namah Shivaya, which came to me when I was having my appendicitis in India. I thought I was going to die.
Maybe that's
said, well, if I'm going to die, I better go to Shiva or something. Or Shiva better come and save me. I don't know, one or the two, but that's who I'm appealing to at this point. I was chanting Om Namah Shivaya for hours, lying on the bathroom floor, vomiting and in pain.
Bless you.
So I have a very special connection with that mantra. But also, I'm curious about this because there was a time in Mysore when, you know, sometimes you're in that room and it's so busy and there's so many people and like so much going on. And if you're not starting sort of first thing in the morning and you're coming into a room with everyone already practicing and in their, you know, zone, it's kind of hard sometimes to like create your little bubble. And so I actually started chanting. I mean, I've chanted internally different mantras at different times, but this one period I was really going through the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi.
Oh, wow.
Which, of course, is English and Christian, but it was really beautiful. It was really incredible. And so I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are about that. Like, I mean, I know there's something special about the Sanskrit and India and the mantra and the connection to yoga, but what about like this uniting or this combining of different sort of traditions?
I think you have to tune in to the essence of whatever it feels good for you. And if it draws you to that space, then go with it. If the gateways to Sanskrit are not open, then find another gateway that takes you to that place of stillness. And I think that can happen in any shape or form, whether that's Islamically, you know, in any of the Judeo-Christian religions, anything that brings you towards that inner space. And like you say, just withdraws the senses away from the external and brings you inwards. You go there. You go there, you take it, you go with it, you fly with it.
Yeah, I love it.
The my thesis in undergrad was on Japanese appropriation of Western cultures.
Yeah,
and so you know, I'd learned, you know, that sumo or flower arrangement were or Zen Buddhism were all Chinese or Korean, that they had appropriated to their culture, because, as you said, there's a lens that they're looking for. Like, there's something that they're looking for. They're trying to get to a particular place. And this is one of those things, yes, this will help me get to that place that I'm looking for, to that, as in this instance, a kind of stillness, as you're describing. But there's also like there's times in Japanese history where they didn't, you know, quite get it right. You know, for example, they're terrible impressionists. the worst impressionist paintings from the early 1900s, or Japanese. Like, they were really like, there was something there that had the spirit of Japan that they liked, that they couldn't quite master. And so they end up looking at you as a Westerner, you end up looking at the Japanese with a kind of patronizing look. It's like, oh, that's really sweet,
quaint.
That's quaint. That's really nice. And it reminds me, like, that might be how, our teacher Sharat looks at us when we're doing yoga. It's like, oh, that's really sweet. They're trying really hard, but it's not quite there. But it's like, oh.
Or maybe, I don't know. I think any doorway that people walk through, and as someone who grew up mainly within a Hindu household, and going to temples, you'd see anyone walk through the door. My mum had a friend who had a vision, I think, in her dream of Durga, West African lady. And she started coming to the temple, and she told the priest, and the Swami was like, well, you come. Do whatever you feel you're comfortable with and just be here, and that's one of the things that I find. And we know it's not always true. We know what goes on in India. We've seen, what's been going on over the last year, 2 years. We're not going to pretend that it's all love and light, there as well.
Oh, you mean like the Hindutva?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can't claim that, everyone's neutral in that stance.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my experience. There's a bit of both, but mainly there's a lot of sort of neutrality there and acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'd like to hope on the whole that if someone wants to walk into a space with an open heart and say, I'd like to learn, then there's the teacher's there that's your job, right? So if the students turned up and said, I want to learn, you just run with that, and you go with that, and you take them as far as that relationship can go, and share as much as you can. It's not there for us to hold like the Brahmins do or did, and still do. That's not the intention. It's there to be shared.
Yeah, it's interesting. People often ask me sometimes about like Sharat and his space that he's holding. That's not exactly their words, but those are how I'm going to describe it.
Yeah.
and I said, always my opinion is I mean, Sharat and Guruji were my first real, authentic in my mind, Ashtanga yoga teachers in the sense that I'd never been in a Mysore class like for longer than a few days, because I'd only ever taken workshop style Mysore classes. We didn't have that where I was from.
Yeah, same.
So we didn't have a teacher really that was able to hold that kind of teaching style and space. And so when I got to Mysore, it was like, whoa, this is like real. This is authentic. It was like that experience you're talking about walking into Eileen's room. Where I was like, holy, this is like.
You feel like you've been transported to India.
And I was. but and so many years, I kept returning and going back, and they were like my main teachers, of course, like took me through intermediate and advanced series, and and so I have so much like love and respect, for them and for that experience and for their teachings and for that lineage and everything that they do, within their sort of sphere of influence. And it's not that, I've agree with everything, because I don't.
No.
And it's not that I share all of the same opinions, because I don't.
No.
But I also can see that, Sharat as a teacher is holding what he feels is the most authentic space that he can hold.
Yeah.
That comes from the way that he was taught by his grandfather. And it is a very authentic space for him. And it is a very authentic way of teaching. And he is trying to stay as aligned and connected with how he was taught.
Yeah, and that's all we can ever be done. That's all we can ever do, right? Share.
And I really appreciate that. Like, I just appreciate that. I don't know, that originality or something. Not originality as in something new, but like as in from the origin of where he came from.
The interesting thing about what you're saying is that there's also an implication of constant recreation of something that is original. And so each generation has to fabricate an authentic original space to make it real for the person who's coming in next.
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
appropriate.
To make it appropriate.
No,
You have to appropriate it.
Yes, exactly.
To make it appropriate.
Yeah. Because whoever walks through that door, I think I only know two people, like Eileen and Hamish, who I've really seen and say, well, this is how we do it here.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it,
yeah,
you know, there are other teachers around that may be, you know, and Hamish, I think, has softened, and Eileen has softened, and, you know, I think we all soften, and each space is really, really welcoming. But there is definitely this, and I love it, you know, as an example, even of just holding space for your teacher. Even I think that's, as a student, when you go into a space, and I think that comes with practice, right? You become more in tune with what the energy of the practice and the community. I remember when we had the whole Guruji, Patabhi Joyce, you know, debacle, everything coming out, and you know, lots of teachers still had his picture up, and were criticized for it. You know, and I didn't agree with having his picture up, but I wasn't going to walk away from my teacher. You know, I was always gonna. I trusted that my teacher had a relationship with that person, you know, that they revered, and I think ultimately it's that relationship on an individual basis that we can only look at. We can't. We shouldn't try and judge everyone's relationship to one person based on how that person was with other people. And that dissociation has to happen with time. And it does happen, but there's a disentanglement that needs to happen with any relationship, and there's a time of mourning and that process.
At the same time, these monuments have enormous power, and they say things. And so, like, you know, if you're in you know, if you're in New Orleans and you're in Lee Square and there's a giant statue of General Lee, you know, at a certain point, you got to fucking take that down.
Yeah, of course.
Because, you know, he was a traitor to the country. You know, I was thinking about this as well. This came up. I was thinking about you being Greek. Now you've appropriated that.
And she's Zeena Warrior Princess.
She's Zeena Warrior Princess.
It's like it was destined.
I was thinking about how another kind of interesting appropriation that the United States was in its formation was at the height of the neo-classical movement, and they appropriated all of these Greek columns for a particular purpose, which was to intimidate their enslaved population, but also intimidate foreigners who deigned to come to the country. Yeah. And they would have to submit to the authority and power of what they presented. So these columns have their purpose is about power. And I think it's interesting when very often cultural appropriation is about power. And I think related to commerce and wealth. And, and I think you really make a strong point there about how Instagram appropriation is about creating a market share for yourself, and it's enormously disempowering to those people that it's stolen from. Which is purposeful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hope most people don't think of it that way. I think most people are good people, and they think, actually, I'm just doing it because it looks good or it looks cool, or, you know. But I hope now we've got enough wisdom out there. We've got the internet. It's not like we don't have access.
We have Google.
We have Google, you know. We have access to articles that might give you a different perspective on things, you know, from the... Again, it depends on whether you're in an echo chamber and just listening to the same thing again and again. And I think especially in our spiritual, you know, wellness world, things can just get, you know, smothered in. But I'm doing it for the good, and I'm highlighting these people's plights, and I'm supporting them in this way, and it can become very contrived, and it can come from a place when it suits them to do it.
Yeah.
as opposed to doing it when it's really difficult to do it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like getting on your mat. Do you do it just because it's a Monday and it feels a good way to start the week, or are you doing it, you know, on that Friday morning and it's been 6 days and you're exhausted, but you're still going to get there?
Are you actually going out to Red Square when the police are there to take you away? Yeah. Yeah. How committed are you?
It's interesting. You know, there was we did the big fundraiser last year, a year ago, almost. It was in March for the, you know, when the COVID was at its height, I would say, in India, and they were running out of oxygen tanks, and, you know, it was really dire. And so we did that big 24-hour fundraiser. And there was someone on Instagram, speaking of social media, who was, you know, quite outspokenly criticizing. Well, first they were criticizing the Western teachers for not doing anything. And then we put together this fundraiser, and then,
criticized,
of course,
for white saviorism.
Then I got criticized for appropriation and white saviorism and other things, which, you know, I mean, everyone's allowed to have their perspective in it, and that's cool, you know, but this person went through and found like old photos that were taken that I took back in like 2007 when I was, you know, 20 something years old, you know, and back in 2007,
everyone was doing it.
And we were at Sri Rangapatnam near the river
taking yoga photos.
I mean, we were outside.
With ash like, on your head.
No, not ash, but you know, it was just something that it wasn't like something that everybody was doing. It was for a particular project that a photographer was working on that he was doing, and he had asked me to do some. And I had never done them in India, and it was the only time. Actually, I did them twice in a different area in a field another time, but she pulled out these photos, and, you know, was like, oh, this is really bad, and, you know, going on about
it. That was like,
and
how many years ago?
Yeah, 15. I was sort of like, you know, I don't know, how far back can we go to like pull out, you know, a lot of education, a lot has changed in like 15 years, right?
Was acceptable then, you know, may not be acceptable now, but we can't base the then on now, you know, by the parameters that we use now, because, as you said, there's more education, we've all changed, we've all broadened our perspectives on what
we didn't mind having our Mula Bandha, you know, adjusted then, you know.
Well, I mean, in a way, I feel like it, you know, that it is another example of just like how things have changed. Not that it was right, you know, not that necessarily it was less disrespectful then. It was just like you were saying, we had these blind spots. We didn't think about it. We didn't know. There was no talk around it. Nobody was having this conversation.
And we will always have blind spots. Just because we're having this conversation today doesn't mean, oh, that's it. We know everything there is to know about cultural appropriation, or that we don't need to learn anything more, or that things aren't going to change, or terminology and language won't keep changing. And we just need to be okay with growth. I think that's the thing. We need to be okay to know that we're not going to know everything. And also we're not going to please everybody. Yeah. You know, we all come to this world with different traumas, or we've experienced different traumas. And I think that's another part of our own responsibility as practitioners, if we have those blind spots, is to look at those blind spots within ourselves and say, well, what triggers me? Is it that I'm being triggered from a personal perspective? Is it that I'm actually think what I'm saying could be useful and helpful for the many, not just for myself? And what benefit is what I'm saying going to bring? Is it going to bring any benefit long term? Or am I just creating something in this moment because I feel it needs to be created in this moment and have no long-term benefit? I think the long-term benefit is really important.
I feel like a lot of my social media posts have no long-term benefit.
No, you'd be surprised. People will come back to that, you know, in 2 years, and it will still be relevent. You know,
I hope
that's
so,
the long-term benefit.
I do have my doubts about that.
I have to say though, when I watch like something like the Country Music Awards, and I am also deeply offended by the cultural appropriation that's going on, because like you see people and it's like, you watched one Yellowstone episode, and now you're a fucking cowboy with no cattle, and you're up on stage
with no cattle
and shaking your ass with a and like you're from Massachusetts. Like, fuck off. I'm so deeply offended. Like, growing up poor in country in Louisiana, and I'm like, you're not fucking country. Like, this is such deep. It pisses me off. I get triggered.
But that's it. You know, we all feel. You know, wherever I think there's been pain, and a tradition or a practice or some sort of reverence has been born out of that pain. Some sort of hope has been born out of that pain, and that hope is taken, and, you know, for lack of a better word, bastardized into something else.
Yes, that's Nashville. That's what I mean. Bastardized,
you know,
country, culture. Yes,
I think that's where we sort of go. But and I don't mean change. I mean bastardized. Has it been taken into something that's completely for, you know, consumerism and just for consumption purposes, rather than for transformation? If you look at the blues, as we were talking about before, that, you know, the blues came out of pain. It came from the cotton fields, right? It came from that deep sorrow. And if someone
it's real
is singing the essence of blues from sorrow, then you feel that, regardless of whether they have ancestors that come from the cotton fields or not. Like, you really feel that.
But if they don't have it, it ends up being plastic soul.
It just becomes plastic soul.
Yeah.
That's a new, maybe that's a new form of music. That's a new genre.
A blues artist, I forget who it was, told John Lennon that about the Rolling Stones. Oh, that's plastic soul. And so John really liked that term, and then came up with the album Rubber Soul.
Great.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And then I think later on, something like, I don't know if it was all the fucking heroin, but like the Rolling Stones became truly authentically blues.
Yeah.
And they really finally got there. I think it sometimes...
I think it was the yoga.
It takes a while, right?
It takes a while. And I think that about like yoga teachers, like how much punishment, like how much... how many, you know...
Can we limit that just to Ashtanga yoga teachers?
Yeah.
But it is kind of true when you think of like the journey of an Ashtanga practitioner. You kind of come into like the yoga class all like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and like ready for yoga. And then you're like, oh my God, what is this?
This is brutal.
Like, right? And then you brutalize yourself for like a number of years, and then you become really like authentically understanding what yoga is.
That brutality is not. It may have been necessary to get to the point where you understand it's not necessary.
It was necessary. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much. It was. You had to take a beaker jar of abuse for 25 years to understand that it wasn't necessary to do that at all.
Maybe not from other people, but maybe we self-inflict it. You know,
then it moves you too into like other disciplines, right?
Sure, for sure.
Like you don't necessarily walk into yoga like, oh, I want to be vegetarian and I want to tell the truth and clean up my life.
No.
And no one does that.
I think I walked into it. I think I walked into it, but you know, it was brought to me and I was tuned into it. So I think my journey was always, but different to someone who says, you know, I came to it because I felt like I wanted to stretch my hamstrings. Like that wasn't my journey, and I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, that was my journey,
or show off how long my hamstrings are.
Yeah, you know. But I think that I felt called to being in that room and being on that mat.
Mm-hmm.
But I can understand that there are people that literally just want to feel something, right, in their body, and they're being called to feel something, and the language that they have is, I want to stretch something, or I want to strengthen something. And that's the language that's appropriate for them to understand what it, you know, that there's a need to come into their body. And they don't really have, you know, in our culture, you know, Western culture, we don't have the framework to understand that human need to come into the body other than, and when it does happen, what do? We say, oh, we're going to go out and have a drink, and we numb it out.
Right.
You know, or we abuse the alcohol to numb it out. It's not just a social thing where we just enjoy it. We're not just enjoying that alcohol. We take it to a point where we numb ourselves out. Yeah. And I think you're right. The asana practice for me lent so much of itself to opening other doors, to exploring other ways to experience the deeper levels of practice, whether that's mantra. And mantra has been massive for me, you know, just hugely empowering, healing, so healing. To the point where, you know, again, that sort of teenage rebellious where you're part of you, where your mum says to do it and you don't want to do it. And then 20 years down the line, you go, I should have been doing it all this time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that mantra for me was that, sitting in stillness. I couldn't do that when I was younger. I couldn't sit. I needed that movement of the asana practice.
You know, there's something really beautiful about that, and about that coming around to an idea and coming around to, you know, a notion that you learned early. You know, you had those beautiful memories about practicing yoga with your mom, you know, when you were 5. You kind of remind me of a friend of mine. I was thinking about this, Naki Duong, who was a student of mine in San Francisco, was a fabulously wealthy pharmacist who gave that up to become a Vidal Sassoon hairstylist, which is, you know, like 1/10 the money.
Yeah.
You know,
and
you did something quite similar. You had a physically demanding job in dentistry that was really taking a toll on you.
Yeah.
And you left that for a physically demanding yoga job for 1/10
for 100th of it, or 1,000th of it, 100,000th of the pay.
And I wonder if you could. How did you come to make that choice? Like, how did you come around to be who you are now?
Well, I think subliminally it was always there, whether I wanted that path or not. I think yoga. I've heard it. I think it was in one of your last podcasts, but it resonates so much. Yoga's always been that best friend, a bit like Krishna and Arjuna. You know, in fact, exactly that. That, you know, I don't ask anything of you, but I'm always going to be here. And when you need me, and when the time's ready, I'm going to take you on that battlefield. I'm going to take you off there. And so for that, I think it was my final year of dentistry with one of our friends on the course is a really good photographer, and he wanted to create a yoga end of year book for us and a graduation book. And he sent us all some questions and was taking photos of us on clinic. And one of the questions was, what will you be doing in 10 years' time? And I mean, I was literally still only going to this twice a week class and, you know, but practicing my Mysore practice at home, you know, doing my own. I didn't have a Mysore practice as such in a shala. But I said, I'll be teaching yoga in 10 years. So I had no idea how I was. And it wasn't even, it was almost like a flippant comment that a joke. I'm going to be teaching yoga in 10 years, because I'm always off to yoga. Everyone knew that I couldn't stay out late because I wanted to get up in the morning to practice. And that's exactly what happened. You know, so be careful what you wish for and what you manifest.
That's so interesting. I had a really similar experience, not with the photographer or the yearbook, but also just like even before I really was like that into yoga, I was just like kind of into it. I just had this like yearning to like know more and to like just to practice, and like I was just like seeking. But it was like almost like a voice or something from inside that was like, you're going to teach yoga.
But I mean,
and it was like, I'm going to teach yoga. And I was like, I don't even know how to do yoga, but that's what I want to do.
I remember, you know, even I think it was in my second year at dentistry, Vicky came and gave me this book because she had started teaching me some third series postures and she was mixing it up, you know. And she said, here's this book. You need to go and study with this teacher because I can't take you any further. And it was David Swenson's book.
Right. Nice.
And I was like, well, thanks, Vicky. Love you very much, but I'm off to become a doctor. I'm off to become a dentist. Like the weight of the world is on my shoulders. I'm going to become the first doctor in the family. I'm off. You know, that's not a thing. That's for Europeans that go off and do that, right? You know, we don't do that.
No.
Right.
So then, I guess by the time I got to about 5 or 6 years of working as a dentist, my body had started to really feel the pain of like 8 hours of sitting and twisting, and NHS work is brutal. Like it's back to back patients, but I really wanted
the
to stay
public health network.
So in the National Health Service, I really wanted to stay in the NHS. So I felt a real calling that treatment, even though it's not free, it's still reasonably affordable, even though the papers will say it's not, you know, but you know, it is still reasonably affordable. There's only 3 layers of payment, and you know, if you're genuine, if you really can't afford it, it is free. You know, if you're on benefits or you know you receive government help you. It is free. And I felt really impassioned to stay at that point because I wanted of work, because I wanted to support that and support people who needed that help. And I feel very proud that we could do that. We were in a country, and I was privileged enough to be able to go and study, right, and be able to give back in some way and not just rinse the private sector.
When your country takes care of everyone, you feel a sense of pride to it.
I think so. My parents had worked in the NHS for 40 years, and I just felt really deeply connected to that. But then that's
for our American listeners. I just wanted to let them know that's how it feels.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah.
And then
feel good,
feel
proud.
Good about,
yeah.
And then, but it was starting to take its toll, and I did a teacher training at Tri Yoga, and that was 2 years long. And I specifically chose that because I wanted that length of time. I could have spent a month. I could have taken a month off and gone off somewhere and done some fast track thing, but I felt that need that we need that time to transition and develop. And I didn't have the capacity to go and sort of assist anyone or do the the proper Ashtanga route in that sense. But then at some point I decided I'm going to resign. I'm going to leave. We always had to give 3 months notice, and I was like, I'm done. And then I got another job. Like after I was offered another job. I was like, oh well, that might work actually, because it's better hours. I have a full hour for lunch break, and I have a whole half an hour for new patients. So then I thought, oh, well, that will make me happy again. Surely it was all the other stuff that wasn't making me happy. And then after 2 years there, I thought, if I'm not happy here, and all I'm doing is clock watching and wanting to rush out to teach,
then it's really not going to work.
And people are turning up with kebabs in their mouth, and this really isn't me,
Right.
And so then I resigned again. And then and both times I resigned with nothing to go to. I just felt that there was going to be this calling, or this pathway would open up. And then I found myself working for a medical writing company, and that just worked because it was a 9-to-5 job where I could go to Mysore in the morning. I was practicing with Ursula. Actually,
Ursula. Yeah, I know Ursula.
I was practicing with Ursula at Soho, and I was working around the corner from there. So everything started to synchronize itself in that way. And then she was like, well, it's time for Hamish. Off you go.
Off you go.
Off you go. And the company that I was working for was moving over to the States, and I wasn't going to go, so I was made redundant. And I was like, yeah, there we go. We are flying this yoga teaching thing.
Wow.
And I just started taking as much cover. You do what you do. You take as much cover as you can. You get you start sending off your CV to all the studios.
You network with other yoga teachers, let them know, oh, if you can't teach a class, let me know, I can cover.
Yeah, but it was an interesting pathway. I think we've all been down that, sort of route of, how accessible were yoga studios to teachers of color.
Yeah.
And that I really found, it was, we were right at the precipice of that changing.
Right.
But it was still very much there.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And it was
because you're Indian.
There's resistance.
Huge amounts of resistance.
Wow.
Yeah. There was massive. And I think there still is, but definitely nowhere near as much. It's very nuanced. I think now we're in a box ticking scenario. Like, we've got everyone of color that we should have on our photos.
That's quite different, isn't it?
Dear.
Because they've been held accountable to that at some point.
But I think we're also shifting out of that scenario, and it's almost like like we were talking about with puppies or children. We have to go through each stage, right? And so it becomes authentically embedded in the culture rather than just staying at the box ticking. And I think it shifted a lot over the last 5 years, but it took a lot of work. We were, a lot of work from teachers on the ground that we don't see on Instagram. A lot of work from people in London pushing and having conversations and talking and having really difficult conversations that took its toll on a lot of people. But I think we did some good work. I think created a lot of good change.
Yeah. I read this article recently. You're just reminding me of it, and I'm going to find it and send it to you. and it was an article that was comparing yoga journal covers from yoga journal inception until now.
Yeah.
And like there was like charts and graphs and stuff, which was amazing.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, it was like more men and more ethnic, and white women were like very low. Like almost no covers were of white women. And it was like more based on like spirituality and like India and like practices from the East coming to the West, and like gurus and like the whole, you know, cultural kind of like where yoga comes from. And then over the years, it was so interesting to watch these like graphs change. And then, I mean, now primarily it's like 90 was, I mean, it's shifted now a little bit, but you know, it was like 90% white women all doing asanas. But before there was like only a small percentage of asanas were on the cover. And I was like, wow, this is really fascinating because, and the synopsis, it was somebody's like PhD thesis or something, but it was basically that yoga journal started off sort of as like a more like an educational type, you know, what is yoga, and you know, and then it turned over the years progressively, it got put into the category of beauty. And so then
and then the definition of beauty is so fixed.
And so then also it was interesting because it kind of shaped the yoga culture as well in North America, at least, and probably in other areas too, because it's worldwide. But
for sure, it was the only journal we had for a long time.
And so it was just a really interesting kind of thing to think about, of how, like, you know, sort of this media shapes a culture, like or a subculture, like the yoga subculture, but also there was more women than also practicing, right? More women kept coming and coming and coming and buying the magazines. And so then they were like, well, our target audience is white women who can afford yoga magazines who are interested in beauty.
There's a kind of biofeedback loop there.
So it was just fascinating. And it kind of reminded me a little bit even of like the social media now, right? Of like
who's looking at and getting the likes.
Like we're kind of stuck in this weird
and how often
loop.
You complain about how when you do an asana Instagram, a factor of 10 more likes.
100.
Same.
A factor of 100.
Same.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel that it doesn't really seem to matter what we do in the other direction. That, you know, that helps to shift it more towards the, you know, on Instagram at least anyway, towards more interaction or more engagement away from the asana pictures. And I don't know what the answer for that is, but I do know that I also teach on a teacher training program, you know, and we've had students come through that have just learned on the internet. You know, they've literally just learned with teachers on the internet for 6 months, and they're like ready to become yoga teachers.
I love it.
that new student disease.
You know, and it's really tricky to sort of balance out that wonderful enthusiasm that someone clearly has, and devotion and dedication, because that takes commitment, right? To put your time down and aside to want to commit to a teacher training, or you know, your money down, and you invest in yourself to take on a course. So to honor that, but then also try and find a way to honor the original teachings, you know, and go through that sort of stripping back of, well, actually where we may be right now is actually where we should actually be a bit further back to start our journey, right? And how do we relearn, how do we unpack what that, I think, damage to some extent has been done. There's been some good stuff, because it broadens people's awareness and it makes yoga to some extent more accessible. But is it yoga? You know, and that's what I keep coming back to. But is it yoga that we're saying is more accessible, or are we contorting the version of yoga that is being made available to people?
Are we contorting the contortions?
We're contorting the contortions.
Oh. Fuck.
That's so, it's really, it's so interesting, right? This term yoga that, you know, I mean, it's like the first question of every teacher training, right? Can you define yoga? And like, still we're trying to define it in a way that is, I mean, sure, it's the asana, but also it's like, being present. Also, it's the experience of union, of oneness, but what is that, right? Is it pranayama? Is it meditation? Is it right? Is it just mindfulness? Is it right? And so it's very interesting in the sense that, I mean, it's just, again, it's like one of those stereotypes. It's just easy when we say yoga, everyone immediately thinks asana.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I say yoga, even in my head, I see asana.
100%.
And I have to be like, oh, no, stop.
And I have to say it, like when we're talking about yoga, even in the teacher training rooms, I'm like, I have to remind myself it's asana that you're talking about, and keep saying asana, and so that you create that differentiation that actually what I'm talking about right now is asana.
Yes.
And this is the foundation for you particularly, or in this moment, and from that we build and we bring things in and we open ourselves up to receiving teachings in different ways or from different modalities and be okay with that.
But when I hear asana, the first thing that I think of is a project management app. So I don't think of.
I was just like so upset when that came out. Like I don't have the energy for it, but I'm so upset. Well, that's not my battle, but it's not great.
I mean, it does make sense because, like, when you're online project managing, you are sitting a lot. So
they've used it in the right context then.
Zeena, I just want to say that we've talked about a number of very difficult conversations and that are rife with conflict, and people are very upsetting, and yet you have such a beautiful light about you and a way of disarming ahimsa and damage that I think is really lovely. And I think I just really want to say how much I appreciate the time that you're taking with us and this, and to have these conversations. It's really felt really nice and healing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thanks for the opportunity to share that, because I think these conversations do get misunderstood or misinterpreted as too difficult to have or too fiery, and we should just stay away from them. But I think as yoga student, first and foremost, if we're going to walk the path of being a student, then, even in the West, what did students do in the 60s? They took to the street, right? They marched and they protested and they took those difficult discussions to the public. And I think as a yoga student teacher, we should be able to do that as well. We should be able to hold that space as well. And that's one of the teachings I'm sharing a lot with the yoga students that are coming through the teacher training. If you can't hold space for yourself, you also need to be able to hold space for others as a teacher or even as a student. When you walk into a shala, you need to be able to hold your space so that you don't affect those on the mat next to you. And if we can't do that, like, what are we doing? Sweat everywhere, and sweat everywhere.
Yes, literally and metaphorically.
Yeah. And that's such an important part for me to share. Is so much more than yoga, so much more than asana, right? So much more. Which is why I love our Wednesday evenings, which is now Wednesday, which used to be Tuesdays at Clubhouse. And
that's what I thought, because I thought the Clubhouse was Tuesday. I didn't know what you meant by Wednesday.
Yeah, we changed it to Wednesday.
It's Wednesday Clubhouse.
It's afternoon. It's at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and that's 8 p.m. I believe.
UK time.
UK time.
So 9 p.m. European time.
Yeah.
2 o'clock our time, something like that. 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
Yeah, 1 o'clock.
Mountain time.
I think
noon
too late for
Pacific time.
Well, too early for India. Too late for India. Sorry, too late.
Yeah, it's like 1:30 a.m. India time. It's a little.
But the good thing is now we get recorded, so we can share that.
That's right. They are recorded, and so people can tune in and listen and enjoy those conversations.
How would I find that Clubhouse?
You have to download the app.
And then how do I find yours, though? What's yours?
Oh, it's called Ashtanga Yoga Club, I think, or Ashtanga Yoga Room.
Yeah.
And then how could people find you if they wanted to work with you, Zeena?
So I teach at Yoga West, which is in West London, and at in Acton, and I teach a 3-day-a-week Mysore program there.
Nice.
We've slowly built it up from one day. We've got a really great owner who supports. His dad's actually from Mysore.
Cool.
So he loves Ashtanga, and it's his own little project. But as you know, in a yoga studio, it's hard to sustain Mysore program. But he's really invested in the Mysore program, so that's been lovely and very lucky to fall into that. And then I also teach a Tri-Yoga-led class there as well.
And could like Martha from Florida, could she find you online?
She could find
somewhere?
me online on Instagram, Zeena Kali Yoga.
Zeena Kali Yoga.
And you do have a website. You should put your schedule on your website.
Yeah, I need to deal with that.
Do it.
I'm getting some B-schooling here.
Yeah, come on.
And what sort of projects or films do you have coming up?
Projects.
Yeah. Do you have anything?
Return of the Xena Warrior Princess. No.
I've heard that might be on the IMDb.
It's coming
out.
I've heard that.
Keep an eye out for that. I'll let you know about it on my Instagram.
Oh, good. We can find out about your new projects there.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely.
I want to see some of those tiaras pulled out.
I'll find a picture and send it to you for sure, with a wand as well. I'd often have a wand.
Perfect. That'd be great.
I'll look for that.
Oh, so wonderful to have you join us today. Thank you so much for taking your time.
Thank you as well for having me. It was lovely to speak to you both.